I'm coming. Okay. Okay, so I always start these things by saying, this, because I give you advice doesn't mean that I'm smarter than you. It just means that I've done more stupid stuff than you. 25 years of driving, I have done some really bizarre things in my time, and I try to learn from my mistakes and share them with you so that you don't have to learn that way. And I also have some formal training. I've been very fortunate to have some very good horses that allowed me to win 3 national championships, and I'm a level 2 proficiency driver with the Carriage Association of America. So this is kind of the basics of carriage safety. Basically, we never take the bridle off while hitched to the vehicle. Before you put the vehicle to the horse, when you're hitching, you want to make sure that you already have the reins attached. We want to make sure that we don't leave a horse tied to the side of the trailer with the carriage attached to them. And the driver is always the first one in and the last one out. So you should not have a vehicle without a driver. That's a big safety thing. And I know that there are some people that really debate that, but it's an accident waiting to happen. And that's the reason why at most driving shows, if you do happen to leave your carriage and not have a driver in there, or take your bridle off without having the horse unhitched, they will ask you to leave the grounds. So that's how important it is to us. So I'd like to just pass that along. It is not an SCA rule, but do try to keep that in mind, that it's really important not to do that. We want to make sure that everybody's safe. I have shared this list of safety options before, and I'd be happy to share it again in the comments, and then you can use it as you need to. This is the American Driving Society pleasure harness chart. It gives you an idea of what we're looking for. Now, we don't all have a fjord that looks like this, but the idea is still the same, whether you're driving back in 1497 or today in 2023. We really would like to have, unless you have a vehicle that is otherwise designed otherwise, we would like to have the shafts level. We'd like to have the breast collar coming up and being right there above the point of the shoulder. We want to make sure that it's not interfering with their breathing. We want the tip of the shaft to come to the point of the shoulder. Ideally, we want to make sure that as we come back on the horse, there's not a lot of pressure on the saddle, usually less than right around 5 pounds or so. There's a lot of interest right now in experimenting with how much pressure should be on the back, or excuse me, on the neck strap, but there's no real rules on that yet. As we come back, we see that the traces are in a straight line, which helps with our line of draft. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Our breeching, which is around the back of the horse, we want to make sure is low enough that it doesn't go up underneath the tail, but yet high enough that it doesn't interfere with his legs when he goes to stop. If you have it too low, you can take out the legs from underneath the horse when you're going down a hill. So this is the basics. The American Driving Society has this chart on their website, so you can print it out as well. It's a good basic page, so it's something that we use a lot. So here we have another idea of something being hitched. This is not a Meadowbrook, but it works similar to a Meadowbrook, which I know a lot of people drive. We see them a lot in the SCA. This horse does have a collar on. The collar goes with the shoulder. It fits well. If you have this type of collar, you should be able to put your hand in between the windpipe of the horse and the actual collar. And that way, you know, you have enough space. Again, even with this type of collar, we want the traces to come back and have a nice line of draft going back to the vehicle. This makes it easier for the horse to pull. Sometimes the line of draft is higher or lower. Typically, we don't want it to be higher than it is right here, but it is sometimes lower, and you'll see that often on farm implements or on some of the wagons. And that's okay, as long as we're keeping the traces above the horse's hock. And the collar and everything makes a nice line. We want an uninterfered with line of draft.
Sorry, what's the line of draft?
So that goes from the point of the shoulder, where it connects to the breast collar, back to the vehicle. So that's literally where he's pulling from. Does that make sense? So on this one here, your line of draft is this black line that comes straight across. That's your set of traces. And so he has a real nice straight line of draft on this one. On this one here, see how it slopes down just a little bit? That's because of the type of carriage system. But it's still a nice uninterfered with line of draft. Sometimes if your collar or your breast collar doesn't fit correctly, it'll be either too high or too low. Sometimes the traces, the breeching interferes with the traces, things like that. You really want it to be a nice uninterrupted flow is really what you are looking for. We don't want to make it harder for them to pull. The line of rein, which is the other thing that we're looking at, is the connection between the horse's mouth and the driver's hands. And here, even though it's going uphill, it's very uninterrupted. In this one that we looked at here, maybe, oops, sorry. It comes back. So it does, this is pretty normal where it comes up to the breast strap, the neck strap, and then goes back. And that's perfectly fine as well. We just don't want it to really go from the mouth to the harness or the saddle and then down, because that means that your line coming out of your rein terrets isn't smooth, and you're going to have a harder time communicating with your horse. So a nice line of rein, make sure that you can communicate properly with your horse, and a nice line of draft helps him pull correctly and easily. Cool. Everybody, any questions? Okay. So yeah, so there's your line of, so the seat is the other thing that we should talk about. In general, unless your vehicle is designed differently, the seats should be level. If they're not level, typically that means it doesn't fit the horse quite right. There are exceptions. Some jog carts are set differently. A marathon vehicle, you might be up higher. If you're driving perhaps a butcher wagon, those would be slanted back. Does anybody know why you might slant back a butcher wagon or an ice wagon?
So is the ice getting widen off?
Yep, we want it to go out the back and not up by your feet. So butcher wagons, milk wagons, ice wagons have a slight slant to them, and that's intended. You'll also see that with, like I said, jog carts. The quarter horse industry often has a vehicle that has a slight slant to it, but the seat itself should be pretty level. If it's not, you can sometimes adjust it by dropping down your shafts if you need to, sometimes adjusting them by a hole. When a vehicle is well balanced, you can hold it where your horse should be holding it. And it should be very light for you to hold up. You should be able to hold that with two fingers, no problem. While somebody gets into it, you might need to hold on to it completely, but it should not weigh a lot, because again, we're looking to put like 5 pounds of pressure on that saddle pad. And so a balanced vehicle should be pretty light when it's in proper position. If it's not, there are a few things you can do. And one of them is moving the seat either forward or backwards, depending on what you need. And sometimes you can change the axle underneath. If your vehicle was not intended to have the axle moved, you probably don't want to do that. But some of them are built that way. And so like my vehicle has a kind of like a wrench type thing on the back, and it screws and moves that axle forward or backwards. Almost all vehicles, with the exception of Meadowbrooks and some dog carts and things like that, you can move the seats on nowadays. So if you aren't sure if how balanced you are and things like that, if you have somebody to hold your cart, you can get in and just lean forward and then lean back, and that person will be able to feel that movement. You want to balance it to your normal driving weight. So if there's normally 2 of you in the cart when you drive, then that's what you want to balance it for. If you're normally the main driver in the vehicle, then you would balance it for you. If somebody's going to get in there and just drive with you for 5 minutes, or one day for like the family, then you don't have to rebalance it unless you've drastically changed the weight. But if you're going to drive that way day by day, you need to rebalance it. Any questions on that? Because balancing is one of those things that is often confusing. Okay, so the other thing that is the hardest thing for people is the breeching or holdback strap. And this is what connects your vehicle to the shafts. And it comes down off the breeching and often wraps around the shaft. And it's a piece of leather. It usually has a buckle on it. You can use a snap on it if you feel safe doing that. Some people do, some people don't. And so what you would do if that's the case, if you're using this vehicle consistently with the same horse, you just leave this wrapped on your shaft and you unsnap it from the ring there. This will go through to help hold and distribute tension. It's going to go through the footman's loop, which is on the bottom of the shaft typically. And usually it's either brass or gold. Sometimes it's silver. But that's how you make sure it stays in one spot. We often wrap it to help distribute the pressure. In the old days, they did not wrap it as much as we do today. They would have just cut the leather and had it worked one way, or set it up for that horse. Different day, different society. So this is the way we often wrap these now. Sometimes you will see traces wrapped around shafts, particularly in the show ring for light harness horses. So you're talking like hackneys, and occasionally a Morgan or something like that. Unless you really know what you're doing, you should probably not do that. So there's several reasons why they do that. One is they think that it opens up the shoulder more and lets the horse move their legs differently so that they really get that action. But their traces are stitched in traces. So most of our traces today are buckle in. So we buckle them. You can see here by his shoulder where the buckle is. And that way you can change the length of the trace to fit whatever vehicle or horse that you need to. Back in the old days, they were all joined together. It was all one leather piece. And so whatever length you had is what you had. And so sometimes they will still wrap them around the shafts if they're too long. Unless you really, really have to, I would suggest not doing that. If you have a break, you really have a break. Bad issue. So does anybody use an overhead check? Does anybody know what an overhead check is?
I do not.
Okay. So we see this red strap that goes up from the back of the horse up over his ears and comes down to the bridle. Okay. That's an overhead check. And this is the thing that Black Beauty, when it was published, had a tremendous effect on society. It was like the Bambi in hunting. It makes it so that a horse can't put his head down. There are very valid reasons for using it, particularly if you have like 4-H'ers, they often use it for safety. And if you have a horse that likes to put its head down, it'll stop that. horses generally have to put their heads down before they can be bad. Not always, but generally speaking, it's hard to buck or do something without being able to move your head. And a overhead check helps with that. So that's why people will sometimes use them for a safety precaution. This is the way that they used to be done in the 1920s, and you can see that it's quite tight. Today, we typically don't see them as tight. And so you would normally be able to put your hand in between the horse's neck and this strap, and you would have plenty of room. A lot of times people leave it just a little floppy off to the side, because a horse, to be able to balance and move correctly and use its body, needs to be able to collect its head. And when you have an overhead check on it, it severely limits the ability to do that. Now, I don't have a picture of it, but you often see with draft horses in particular, side checks. And that's what the Budweiser Clydesdales have, that chain that goes up the side of their face. That's a side check. And one of the reasons why they continue to use them on the big draft horses and the pairs is so that their heads stay fairly straight, so that they don't turn around and look at their buddy and then proceed to rub their head on him and pop the bridle off, and do things like that. So that's one of the reasons why they still use them, is a valid safety issue. But if you use it wrong, then it's not good. And again, so when you look at them, you'll see that there's definitely space in there for your hand, and the horse can move their head, but they can't completely turn it around. If you have draft horses in your program, there's a very good chance that they'll either have a side an overhead check or a side check on, and that's not a big deal as long as they're loose enough and not interfering with the use of the horse, or the horse's use of its body. If you feel like there's a problem, then you're going to have to decide what you want to do. There's not technically a rule for the SCA about the use of them. Again, there's very, very valid reasons to use them, but if they're too tight, then you can get some problems. Typically, you can tell they're too tight. It's because the horse's nose will be out and he won't be able to put it down. Does anybody have any questions about this particular harness?
Just a quick question on the check. I've heard that some breed associations don't allow checks for showing. Is that your experience?
Yeah, so the American Driving Society does not allow them. And again, very valid reasons. We're asking horses to do things that we didn't ask them to do 100 years ago. We're asking them to do dressage. We're asking them to do cones and move their bodies. And we're asking them to go around in a ring in a collected manner. Typically, you didn't see that back then. And when you have that much interaction and control, you don't really need an overhead check. If you've got a horse that wants to put its head down, yes, you might need an overhead check. If you've got a kid driving a pony, again, that's perfectly valid. And if you have a pair or 4-in-hand or multiples, you may very well need a side check. But to do the things that we ask them to do when we start talking about combined driving, dressage, even show ring driving, where we're asking them to do more than just trot on, because you'll still see overhead checks in the Hackney world, saddlebred world, basically light horse. They're just literally going in a circle. They want their horses upright, and they're not asking for a lot of collection. And so they can get away with it. When you start asking for collection and you want that horse to use his body differently, and they can't do it with the overhead check on. So 4-H, some 4-H states are yay, and then others are like, nope. So, but again, there are valid reasons. Any other questions, or I hope that answered your question?
Yeah, thank you.
The side checks, do they come in pairs, one on each side, or are they just on one side?
Yes, they come on each side. And so where this, it would come down the outside of the bridle, and where his ears are, they would come together there and then go back to the saddle. I'll be honest, I don't normally talk about side checks in this stuff, but it just seemed like the right time to talk about it. And so with this one, the overhead check goes down the middle of the face. The side checks go up the side, which, you know, makes sense when you think about it.
Gotcha. I was just curious.
Yeah, but it's one of those things you don't think about until you stop and think about. So let's talk just a little bit about rain settings. So the Liverpool is probably one of our most popular in normal driving cheeks. It is the mouth that's in it can change. So you can have something really thin, you can have something really thick. It just high port, low port, whatever. This is the outside of the bit. It does not reflect what is in the mouth. So there are multiple places to attach your lines. So when you put it in that main slot around the ring, that's the mildest setting that you pretty much can get. That's just like working with anything else that you might. All I can think of right at the moment is a ring bit. And I'm sorry, that's probably not what we're. The rough cheek gives you just a little bit more pull. You don't see the rough cheek all that often, but you do see number 3 a lot. That's the first slot. It's where a lot of people drive. It does have some moderate curb action as well as pole pressure. And this is like driving in most riding bits. Okay. So it's perfectly normal to be up on 3. 1, 2, and 3 are very normal. Although we just don't see 2 very often. 4 and 5 though, that's where you start going, you better know what you're doing. So they sometimes call 4 the ladies slot, a lady slot, because a lady shouldn't have to really work to control her horse back in the day. So this would give her quite a bit of pressure, and she shouldn't have to work any harder than that would be. So she would be able to control a horse that's really looking sharp out there as she goes down the road with very minimal muscle. Pardon me. If you're on 5, they call 5 the suicide slot or a dead man slot. Now, there's been times when I've driven on 5 and been perfectly fine. But there's a lot of pressure there, and you should not necessarily need it. I would venture to say that anybody that's driving in the SCA should not be down below that second slot. Now, not all bits have 3 slots, a lot of them nowadays, because again, we look at that third slot as you really shouldn't need it. A lot of them don't even have that third slot anymore. They just have the 2. And in most cases, you're never going to need that 5th slot or the 3rd slot, 5th position. As far as connecting to the lines to the bit, you should really use the actual rein to do so. Snaps can get really messy, and you can accidentally get a horse hooked on them much more easily than you would think. And so I strongly suggest not using a snap on the rein settings unless you absolutely have to. Does anybody have any questions about rein settings?
I have a question.
Sure.
So I'm looking at this bit and I'm thinking of, like, there's a lot of bits out there that have shanks that are as long as that, if not longer. So why is it on a driving bit, like, you know, deathly?
Because it's your line. Remember that line that we had earlier?
Mm-hmm.
Your line of rein?
Yeah.
I can put a tremendous amount of pressure because of the way that goes on this without trying very hard. Okay. And you can't necessarily feel it. Like, so when you're driving, let's say you are in a double bit and you're riding and you start to feel that horse come up and you're like, oh, I've done too much, I need to let it go. sometimes if you are not an experienced driver and you're down on that bottom slot, you may not feel that coming up until you're in trouble, because you can't feel it with your legs. You can't feel the muscles collect. So you would have to feel it coming back to you through the lines, and you would have to see it. And a lot of times an unexperienced person can't see all that. But it's the line of rain is what makes it that way.
Kathleen, do you mind to,
Yes.
and I'm sorry for interrupting,
No problem.
if you were still questioning, what do you consider in trouble?
Well, it depends on how you are as a driver.
So is it like horses running off, or?
No, so if you overbit them, it's no different than overbitting a riding horse. You're a little bit more likely to go up than you are to go forward. And you don't want them to flip while they're in a cart. Running off is no different than if a horse runs off with you when you're riding it. To a certain extent, if you get into a runoff, and I say to a certain extent because there's times you're not going to stop it with a bit. You're stopping it by it's finished being scared or whatever it is, and then it starts responding and its brain kicks in and it's okay, I need to slow down or whatever. If a horse is going to go, I'm not going to stop it no matter what I've got here. I can, however, flip it with the bottom one, or make that horse go up in the air because he's looking to relieve that pressure. And so when you go, hold on, I'm going to go back here just a second. So if I'm here and this horse goes up in the air, he's changing the angle of this line, right? Mm-hmm. And so in its way, it's going to change how much pressure he gets on that fifth slot or that third slot, right? And so if he goes up, then, I've got a problem. That's where I have a problem. He's probably not going to run off with me on the fifth slot, although sometimes that's why you sometimes put them on there. And that sounds so strange to say, but I know that if I haven't put my foundation on this horse, and even if they're high or doing whatever, until I have voice control, there's a point at which I can't stop this horse. I mean, it's no different than when I'm riding him. If he decides he's going to go, there's not a lot I can do. Does that make sense?
It does, and it explains. I just wanted to have it defined, and I think I get it. Obviously, rearing up or getting up, it's not what you want in saddle or in a cart. So 4 legs on our ground sounds good to me.
Yes.
So thanks for explaining it.
And when I overbit, so they really come back to you, and they open their mouth and the tongue's coming out, and you have a pain response at that point versus a control response, I think is part of it. It's easier if I'm sorry, I should have maybe done a video because you can tell the difference when it happens. So we were watching, let me go to this and I'll tell you the story later. So the other thing that you have to watch for the SCA in particular, but in general, is these type of wheels. These are a safety issue, particularly because a lot of the dirt that we drive in with the SCA is deep. And you can break one of these really quickly. We do suggest like a motorcycle tire or a wooden tire. They're less likely to break than these. And you'll think, oh, how could that possibly happen? I went over a little bump once with one in my friend's vehicle, and it bent the wheel rim. And then I was watching a lady go down the long length of the ring. So it wasn't on a turn, it was on the long length. And all of a sudden her wheel just went and folded in half. And if I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't believe it, because I was always like, what's the probability of somebody's wheel bending? It's higher than you would think. And particularly if you're going to do like the Drive for the Prince or something like that, where you're going to possibly do a lot of circles, you really have to be careful about these bicycle wheel because they can and will bend. It's just not the way that if you're going straight all the time, they're most likely they are less likely to bend. But if you're taking a lot of turns, then you're running a higher risk. So we do, in general, recommend not using those wheels. Quick thing here. Do we see anything wrong? I'll give you a hint.
Those reins
It's not
attached
hooked
to.
to the bit.
His reins aren't attached.
So follow the bit up.
Looks like it's not straight.
Oh, the bit's not on
Traces.
the bit's not through the bridle properly.
Yep.
Yeah, it's on the wrong.
So up by his nostril is where the top of this bit is. And I'd like to say that this is the only time that I've seen this, and it's not. Particularly with the little ones, it's sometimes hard to find a bit that fits them. And sometimes people get creative. And this little guy is a gem, and he made it through his entire class, and his 4-H judge never noticed. They also have a snap holding the reins on, which again is probably not the greatest thing. So rather than getting a bit that fit, they bought one that was available and jury-rigged it. Not always the best thing. So when you're looking at your harness and making sure everybody's safe, that is something to take a look at, because I, again, would love to say that this is the only time that I've seen a bit put in wrong, and it is not. The rest of it's not too bad.
I have a bit question while we're talking about the bit here.
Sure.
So if I drive on just the ring, and I have a curb chain, is my curb really doing anything if I have it on the rein on the loop?
Yes. I mean, like, you should be able to put your chin strap, is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, the
Right?
curb chain.
Yeah. So you put the 2 fingers in, and so you've got it loose enough that it works. When you take your shank and you move it back, you should feel that engage. And so depending on your horse, you may need that to engage sooner or later. And you adjust it accordingly. But your curb strap, your chin chain should engage within, a ½ inch to an inch, depending on your horse. I have some horses that, depending on what I want from them, they get a looser chain because they don't like the chin. And then others require a little something stronger. And I say that with the caveat that I have driving horses. There is a difference between horses that drive and driving horses. Horses that drive, their ears are up when they drive, and they're going, and they love to drive. Horses that happen to drive but are more interested in being ridden are the good sports, and they're just getting it done because, well, they like you, and they're not fingertip control. Mine, literally, if I think it, he's there. He's you have to be careful because you can really have him overcorrect if you do too much. The other thing you have to remember, and this is something that I teach a lot, these guys can feel a fly on them. If that's the case, they don't need big movements from you to be able to direct them as to where they're going, just like we don't need big movements in riding. You should be able to do it with, a limited amount of space and a lot of hand finger motion. So it's not big arm movements. As much as we would all like to be Boyd Excel going 30 miles an hour, going through hazards, and really, needing to reach up there and pull a line so that all 4 horses just turn in perfect unison, that is not us. We are not ready for the NASCAR, and so we should be driving in an easier method, or they can feel a fly. They don't need us being loud. All right, let's see what else we have here. Okay. I'm going to go back just 1 second on this bit. So we talk about shanks and things like this. So in general, a lot of the big ringed, you can go with a half shank or something like that. Oh, shoot, I just forgot the name of it. I'm sorry. What we had back here, like one of these. This is pretty much the lightest bit that we get. And the reason why it has this on is so that the bit doesn't pull through the mouth. It is possible, not probable, but it is possible to have a horse turn its head and put the ring here on this bit through a shaft and get hooked. So that's why we tend to like it with more a post. The probability of getting caught is slimmer. The other thing is if you're driving pairs, you will often see a piece of hose or something like that, or a leather strap on the bottom slot. And that is so that he can't reach over to his partner and hook the shank on his partner's rein. And I see that more and more with, we have more and more draft pairs showing up in the SCA, and that's something that you will see, either something covering that, or you take it into a piece of hose and you just put one side up on the shank, curves underneath, put the other side up there, it stays on, and it keeps them from hooking a rein. So something. This little guy could have hooked a lot of reins. All right, so again, this is not official SCA protocol, but one of the things that came up in our last one was session was, what do we do if there is a loose horse? So if you have a show that's a USEF show, you have to file a protocol. And so this is one of those protocols that's been used at a horse show down at the Kentucky Horse Park. It's pretty much the same no matter where you are. It's pretty much just a form. So this is if you're in the open area. Okay, so basically, you know, you want to make sure that if you have a loose horse or a runaway, that you make sure that the person is fine. You get everybody notified. And there should be something type of drivers meeting early on that talks about how to get people notified. And then the announcer kind of steps in and says, you know, we have a loose horse on the property. Please be aware, you know, and make sure that everybody's calm. Then we, you know, need to start securing perimeter exits. The last thing we want is a horse out on the highway. So we double check those. And the other thing is, nothing should be done that is unnecessary to scare the horses more. So when I was down at the World Equestrian Games in 2010, this Morgan pair, very nice pair, comes up and they're on the other side of the shed row from me, and I'm standing there, and I'm watching this pair, and they're talking, and they're just being a good set of horses. And the one reaches over to his partner and just kind of does one of these, you know, no big deal. And he pops his bridle off. Not a big deal at this moment, until the lady goes, "Stop!" And he was like, "What happened? What happened?" And then they started moving. If she had stayed quiet, that horse would have been rebridled with nobody having known anything happened, because the horse itself was going to stay still. 2 weeks ago, I watched a horse take a bridle off, hooked to a plow. And everybody was very, very calm. He was a good, experienced horse. And so he literally is just hanging on to the bit in his mouth very nicely, keeping hold of that bit, while the rest of it just flops down. And they just walked up to him. They did stop the team, but somebody just walked up from the sidelines, put his bridle back on, and away they went again. If you are calm, the probability of them staying calm is very high. Now, if you're worried about your horse's bridle coming off, which is one of the number one problems or cause of horse driving accidents, go ahead and put a gullet strap on that. And that goes from your nose band up to your cheek strap, your throat latch. And it's basically the same piece of thing that's on a halter that you attach the snap to. And it just helps keep your bridle on. You can also braid your mane into your, around your bridle. And there's some other things that they've come out with recently that I have not tried that are commercially available. If you do not have a gullet strap, you can use a dog collar, anything like that. You're just mainly just keeping that bridle on. For the most part, the grooms who are helping you probably know the horses better than you. Not always true in the SCA, but in the commercial driving world, that's often true because they're hired help and they're out in the barn more. So they often try to get the grooms to the horses as quickly as possible. If you have somebody helping you, you want to be able to have that person up at the head of the horse. They want to be aware of where the shafts are so that they don't get hit with the shafts. And you basically want to move everybody to a safe location away from the incident. Once the horse is captured as normal, you want to gain control of the horse's head. Typically, we unharness a horse and we do not walk them back to the barn or the trailer with the carriage still attached. We go ahead and get that off them so that they don't decide to get loose again. And then, if you need an ambulance or whatever at that point, that's when we take care of the people. This is for an enclosed area, which is much more likely to be a SCA issue. Again, this is not formal to the SCA. This is USEF protocol that was put in. So the announcer, again, talks to people. They make sure that everybody stays calm, and they tell everybody what they want them to do. You listen to the announcer. And they typically are asked to walk and make their way carefully off the rail and into the center of the ring. For whatever known reason, tend to go to the rail and will often run around like idiots on the rail. If you have an assistant or a groom with you, you can put down the groom, which means that the groom can get off the carriage. Not that we put the groom under the ground or anything like that. When we put them down, they're still alive. We're just putting them on the ground and letting them out of the carriage. And if they're outside of the ring, then they enter in. If it's a junior, then we make sure that they get an adult with them. You protect the people. You try to catch the horse. You keep quiet and try to not scare the horse. They will just run it out. And that's where I say, there's a point at which when they're running scared like that, it doesn't make a difference if you have a bit in them or whatever. They're not going to stop until they calm down. They may attempt to rejoin the herd. We've all seen that Arab video where they ran right into the middle of the horses. If they come up to the herd, then you just try to be quiet and catch them. Unless it goes on for a long period of time, they will not excuse the other horses because they don't want that gate open. If something happens and they've successfully captured the horse down at the far end of the arena, they may ask everybody to excuse until they pick up the pieces. But typically speaking, they will not let the entire group out unless there's a need for it. Again, we establish control of the horse's head, we get the harness off, and we get them to a safe spot, and then we deal with the ambulance and what else needed. It is not required that everybody wears a helmet, but please think about wearing a helmet. They do save lives, and they can be decorated. So please do think about that. All right, so the other thing so does anybody have any safety questions? Okay. So one of the things that I was asked about by multiple people is, if you're doing events and you're having driving added, how do I know how wide to set the cones? That's always a good question, and it depends on the turnouts. You want to make sure that they are wide enough for everybody to go through. If you're in a competition, they may measure and put everybody that's like 140 centimeters together, and then 125 or whatever. A lot of vehicles now are 140 because that's what they're looking for in competition. At the end of the day, you take the widest one that you've got if you don't want to have to reset cones, and you measure it. If you are having trouble measuring it, or if somebody's already hitched, the way to measure it is to take the cones, put them on the outside of the wheels, have the person drive off, and then measure the inside of the cones. And that way you can do that safely without getting in their way. So in combined driving, often the wheels are, the cones are set 6 inches wider than the wheelbase. This is more for pleasure horses, and this is pulled from the USEF. So 8 to 10, 12 to 16, depends a little bit on what you're asking for. And typically with this group, we're not asking for speed, we're asking for precision. So you're probably in that 8 to 10. Juniors, novices, etc., you can go wider. If you are making an L-shape obstacle, does everybody know what an L-shape obstacle looks like?
I think so.
Okay, so you need to make sure that you have clearance. So they're suggesting that those are about 12 feet long to be able to get everybody in and make the turn. U-shapes, they're 12 foot and then 15 out. And that gives everybody enough way to get their horse in and make the turn. You can adjust it to whatever you need, but it's a good rule of thumb to start with. And so that's that. I am going to we'll stay on here for a minute. I had at one point in time, many years ago, when I first started in the SEA, wrote a email to Matthias saying, hey, this is some hazards that we could possibly use. And using, rubber mats or plywood to make a moat. The only question that I have with the tarp is that sometimes driving horses have studs in their shoes because they've been driven on the road. And I have had horses put their studs through your tarp. So if you are trying to preserve that tarp, that may not be the best option. Using the portable post to make forest, and using the surf store animals to do things, you can do that. I've done things where, like, I put the dragon out there and you had to go rescue the dragon. He got blown off course. I did that with kids. We have one that we did with adults. The passenger gets out and they go up to a hula hoop, and they have to hula hoop around a stuffed frog and then give a frog the kiss before they get back in the vehicle. The eggs in the basket is fun to do, those type of things. And capture the flag. You can do those with, if you have a navigator, groom, whatever you want to do. We can do pretty much anything that a riding horse can do. And I say that with a little bit of caveat that some of our drivers are still novices. And you have to make sure that the circles are wide enough. So you're probably not looking at anything smaller than a 20-meter circle. If you're asking for a pivot, which is where you keep one wheel in place and do a circle, the 360 around that, be aware of what the wheels are like and how deep the ground is. I love doing those, and I have done that as the start of a spiral for Drive Before the Prince. But I know that I have steel wheels, and I have a horse that can do that. We've done the apple bobbing. That's a lot of fun. I was at an event last week where they did the plague control. They were throwing rats around at each other. And so right now, particularly after COVID, The rats are a lot of fun. And you can, move your entertainment and juggling and doing things like that. You can have a lot of fun with whoever's in the back. The biggest thing with the SCA, as far as like doing these things, is we give rides to people all day long, and we give them to our friends, and they get to have all the fun back there. You need to have something so that the drivers can have fun too, and make sure that we're all enjoying our time out there and we're not just, going in circles, getting our horses out. So this may or may not intimidate people. I see that there's a chat question. Oh, okay. This is an example of a really tough cones course. The thing that makes this tough, though, is the angles and the closeness of the hazards. If I move this out and didn't put quite as this curve down here at the bottom, if I didn't make that curve real sharp, I can run beginners through this, and I have, and it's not a big deal. Not this particular course, but FEI courses in general. So if you see something like this, don't be afraid to use it. Just, like where 17 is, I think that's 17. No, that's 5. Just don't make the curve so sharp, and just play with it. Last weekend I was at a show, and they had a triangular shape of land, and they did a really great job with their cones of using that triangle to make it an interesting shape and ask for some interesting things. You should have a change of rein or a change of direction to keep things interesting and challenge your drivers a little bit. And just in case you were feeling a little confused by this, this is the young drivers, so they're all under 18. This is their course. So in theory, we can drive as well as the young kids, right? So again, you might have to say, well, 6A, B, C, and D needs to be a little bit easier, and maybe the same thing with 20. But this course could be done on pretty much any SCAA property that we go out to. That part of it is not hard. What is hard is when you put them close together. And you can also see on the side how what the time allowed is. And so these kids are going out there and they're doing it in 154 seconds. So it can be fast. I would prefer that in the SCA we go for accurate, but if you have experienced drivers and one novice, don't be afraid to put something in there and ask for speed class. Novices have to learn somewhere, and so just keep an eye on them. Did anybody else have any questions about anything?
I was going to ask about, we good news. Ed and I just authorized for driving in Atlanta for the first 2, and we're hoping to sort of start a driving program here. And a lot of folks are thinking about the driving challenges in terms of like the games, like do we like reads and heads. There's a lot of discussion about like weapons handlers. Some folks have thought that the driver should do both and handle weapons. I said absolutely not. And at least not what we're the level we're driving at. Any thoughts on like weapons handlers and doing the games, the traditional STA?
So again, that's when the passengers get to have all the fun. Yeah. Now I have done the reads and things like that, and I just used my whip and I swatted it and took them down. I did it, I think the 3rd time I did it, get stuck on a reed and have to like wiggle it, and I was fine because I knew what I was doing and I had a horse that didn't care. But I can see where that is probably not a good thing for most of our drivers. And if you have drivers that are perfectly okay with doing that again and again with your passengers, that's cool. There are times when I'm perfectly fine with that, but I also want a reward at the end of the day. And something like this is for me a reward. This is where in my connection with my horse shines. And It doesn't have to be cones, but it has to be something that challenges me as a driver and my relationship with that horse to do something cool. I mean, you don't have to have it just be cones. Like I remember Kim Hay did this course once, and it was based on a book, and I don't remember the book, but we went on and it was a fairly small arena, and we went on this quest, and we were going to go do something, and so we went through we went through the woods, and we went through over the water, and we did things, and that was fun as a driver. Whereas a lot of the other things are fun for the passengers. And sometimes there's just not enough time and space for them to do both. And you have to see what your drivers feel like at that point, ask ahead of time. I don't mind giving rides. I don't mind, going out and be in the vehicle for chariot archery, but that's my vacation time and my weekend also. And I want something that's for me as a driver. And it doesn't have to be complex. It just has to be fun. And sometimes we have done it where we, do something stupid for watermelon or something like that. It's not like you have to have big prizes or whatever. You get the first choice of the watermelon. We had this one time where we did it, and again, the slowest person got this big fat donut, and she had a pony that we knew it was going to be this person, and she had a pony that loved donuts, and so the two of them sat there and ate their big donut together, and you kind of have to know who it is, but and again, doing things like the hula hoop with the, where you got a hula around the frog and kiss it, you can do a fairy tale element and have it be fun. And as a driver, I laugh at that and think it's funny, because they're hamming it up, and you can do things like that. But
I could jump.
Go ahead.
I'm the new one in Atlanta, moved down from mid-room. But in the past, we've done challenges with royals or just with some of the populace, and you are able to do like heads obstacles and reeds obstacles that you just kind of, plan for the side your passenger is going to be on. Reeds go down straight one way and straight the other way. And you can also do that with heads, sort of. It's just like alternating, or you can do a pivot, and, the driver gets to do some technical stuff in there and pivot around and weed back through the heads going the other direction to still let someone wield a sword and hit the obstacles. And we've also done rings using a sword to drive through, so you don't have to have a long lance in the cart to worry about tangling up in wheels and such.
We did somewhere, there's video out there of us when we did the rings. Some of the vehicles are safer than others to do those in, and you kind of have to decide what. If you have a lot of vehicles in your area that have the bicycle wheels, you got to take that into consideration. You need turns and not pivots. And same thing with the backing. If you have drivers that can't back without opening their horse's mouth, you don't want them to be backing more than like 3 to 4 steps. You have to take into consideration your skills of your drivers. But when you throw those little pieces into something that's fun for the passenger, yes, it's great for us as drivers. The only thing that you have to be aware of, and it doesn't happen usually, it's like when we were at 50th, we went through the course for the chariot driving or chariot archery, I don't know, 10, 12 times we took people through. So if you have that quantity of people that you're putting through in there, I think there was 5, 6 of us, be aware that you're going to do that, so you don't want to put that pivot, because eventually that horse can get tired of pivoting. But they are a lot of fun if you only have 3 people that are going to play with you. So it's fun when you put something in there that challenges the drivers. Let's see. So we did heads. We did that type of thing. Let's see. moving the flag, that one is pretty common, or I've seen it before. But basically anything that you're doing for the riding horses, technically speaking, we can do. You just need to be aware of the skills of your drivers. And so what are you driving?
Wait, which one of us are you asking?
Yeah, I know what she's driving.
Yeah, okay. So we have a marathon carriage. It's
Yeah.
a two-wheel, has like a little platform on the back that you can have the navigator stand on.
Mhm.
And we have a halflinger who's
Okay.
was a former Amish farm horse. So he's a driving horse that tolerates my riding him. He actually does better with the driving.
I'm gonna see if I can share a different page here. Whoops. All right. Let me see if I can share this. Okay. Share screen. Okay. So if you have a lot of different size horses, so if you're going with your Heflinger up against somebody that has a really nice little mini, they're, depending on how many turns there are in that horse, there's a good chance that they're going to beat you. Every time you take a turn, the minis are faster, almost always, unless you have a really slow mini. So there are time allowances and things like that. So you do need to take a look at that. This is from the USEF. They're looking at, so when it says VSEs, that's still minis, is very small equines. And so if you have pairs, that's a different thing. It doesn't make a difference to a certain extent, as long as you don't have a lot of different horses going up against each other. So like Leanne sometimes brings her pair down to Mount of War Games, and what she needs something wider because she's got the pair, and so her turns are different. Every single time a VSE can technically beat her because it just takes longer to get around the turn, you know. And my mom's pair can beat my dad's Hefling, or excuse me, Fjord on when we have something that's technically a lot of turns, because they can take the turns tighter. So you just need to be aware of that. And there's some suggestions as to, you know, penalties and calculations of how fast they're going and things like that. Just as a, you know, something to take into consideration. Most of the things that we're doing are not really tightly timed, or they got a lot of turns in them. So it's often fine, but just be aware of that. And the same thing with what she was saying about having people do the reads and things like that. If you have a set of minis in your or minis at your event, you may need to consider how, if they can reach correctly or okay without, you know, leaning too far out of the vehicle. Generally speaking, not a huge issue, but I have once had seen somebody not in the SCA that had a course set up, and their horses are draft horses, and that is a whole different height than what the VSE needed. And so that was kind of interesting. So, you know, just be aware of it. Again, this is, so the ADS has a rule book, and it is very similar to the USEF rule book. But I can always access the USEF rule book on their website, and once it downloads it for me in PDF, no problem. And quite frankly, it's just easier for me to get. So that may be something that you want to, at your pleasure, go back and read and kind of take a look at what they have for carriage driving. So they have carriage driving, which is or like pleasure driving, and then they have scurries and CDEs and combined driving and that type of stuff in the rules. So you can look at the scale of complexness of some things, because generally speaking, with carriage pleasure driving, they're not quite as competitive as combined driving. They can be the same horses sometimes, but the vehicles are different. So they wouldn't have a full fifth wheel necessarily, to put it in that type of terms. And it does make a difference if you have a full fifth wheel and brakes and, things like that. This also tells you how to look at the cones. The USEF is a resource for things. The American Driving Society is a resource for things. Carriage Association is a resource for things. I think that you have to be a little careful about your 4-H stuff. And Doe may be able to correct. I don't know if she's still on here, but the last time I knew, we could not give lessons in the SCA. And so it gets to be a fine line sometimes because a lot of people are beginners. They didn't come up through 4-H, they didn't come through FFA or Pony Club. And so they don't necessarily have a lot of instruction until they get to an event or possibly a practice. And you have to be careful about, depending on what state you're in, about liability, about adjusting harness and telling people to adjust harness.
If it's not safe, we can go and do suggestions or to let them know to double check their equipment, their tag, their harness, the cord. In general, practices or events are not riding or driving lessons in that case. It's more that how to handle the weapons or the obstacles presented or to do that activity like riding in front of the prince, that would be the lesson. Obviously, if there's anything that is not safe, it needs to be addressed, but it should not be a driving lesson. Like you need to know what you're doing before you're supposed to show up. That is in general the rule.
Yeah. And it's not a bad rule. It does sometimes make it hard for driving because it's hard to find trainers and hard to find people that are knowledgeable. But that is technically how we do this. So, we have done online book clubs before. If somebody feels that they really want one and there's enough interest in it, I'm happy to do another book club online with people. Usually we get about 6 or 7 people in it. If there's a book that you want to look at, we've done The Art of Driving before, and that's a lot on pairs, but it does have some singles. We can do something like that. We can do the 4-H book, and we just do it as a group of people that get together, not necessarily as an official event for any organization. We've done them on Facebook usually, but we can do them in other places too, if anybody's interested in that. That's how Leanne and I met, and both of us have come a long way in our driving since we first met. And we usually meet at Outer War Games and go off and drive by together and practice our reinsmanship.
And different one suggestion, and we talked last time about it in the last month, and it was just about activities. Would there be possibilities of maybe making some short videos about maybe games you're attending or obstacles you're attending or any kind of driving activity, and then really use those videos maybe to review these are great options, or what worked, what didn't work, what could we improve? Because at the mark we have we have people who are driving now, I wouldn't consider them new, but there seems to be a larger interest with other people want to go and drive. And for me, the way I normally do riding obstacles, I can't see how a carriage would go through that, because most of my obstacle courses are really complex.
Girl, I have been through your obstacle courses. I can drive it.
Okay, Kathleen. It's been a while since you've been with me.
I know.
So, but you see, I also, for me, was one of those, how can I not dumb it down or have to dumb it down for the riders, make it almost no challenge at all, but it would be great for the driving. So we're in the middle ground for that.
Yeah, and I get it. I do. So I don't think at this moment in time, I am the person to create those videos for you, for the simple reason that I don't have the same equipment that you guys are using.
You could visit, we can make stuff.
I know. But my, I was hoping to get there for Iris Festival, but I'm not going to make it.
Oh.
Possibly at Mounted War Games, we could explore something like that, because like Red is Red going to Mounted War Games?
Oh, I can't get my mic to work.
We can hear you.
Yeah, you're
Oh, you
good.
can? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, he will be there, and Kathleen, you are welcome to do anything you need to do with him.
So, somebody like Red is good to practice with or demo some stuff, because Red doesn't care. He'll do whatever you want. And then, like, if you're having practices down in Atlantia, that would be great, and sometimes we just see things that we probably shouldn't do. Yeah, she's got the 50-year speed and obstacle course. The other thing that I would say is have good sportsmanship. Try not to win everything. That's people don't want to come back if they get beat and everything. Yeah, you're smiling. It's the way to, I mean, like, if you get beat every time, that's not fun. So the ride before the Prince, I do need to get going because I know that we're going to talk too long. But when you pick a pattern, there's the book of patterns that Gwen has put together, and was it Gwen? Maybe not Gwen. Jennifer Jobs put together, and I think Gesa has it.
Yeah, it's on the SCA Facebook page as well. All the documents are on Facebook.
So choose the ones that you can do with your horse. So particularly if I have my marathon vehicle with me, which you can argue very validly that they did not have a full fifth wheel during most of the Middle Ages, medieval times. But I like to do the spiral out because it impresses people. And so I like to do that. But if you can't drive it, then that doesn't do you any good. So those are things that you practice at home. And making a spiral with a horse takes a lot of practice. What's the girl in Ohio that's got the mule?
Gotcha.
Yes, Katja. She's been doing that with her mule. She's been practicing on the lunge line on doing a spiral, and she's been practicing for a couple weeks now, and they're getting it. But it is something that you don't just do one day and have it be perfect. You do need to practice those things in advance. But you really look at whether it's a freestyle dressage pattern or the ride before the Prince, and say, what are my horse's strengths? What are my horse's weaknesses? If I am not ready to canter a pattern, then I don't canter it. If I need to take it at a walk, I would rather do it perfectly at a walk than do it at a trot and screw it up. And so you have to kind of take into consideration what it is that you are good at, and everybody has their thing, and go from there. There's a lot of options in that ride before the Prince, and doing like the L shapes and things like that. Some of those things is perfectly fine. Working on your 3 gaits in general, we have slow trot, working trot, and extended trot. Working on having definition between those and getting them in a very timely manner. You shouldn't have to wait 3 or 4 strides to get them, is something that you can do. Also working on the halt, on a square halt, on a halt that is, you as a driver need to learn how to halt without rocking that carriage. And, the breeching is going to do its job and hold it, but you don't want to knock your horse off his feet either. So you need to learn how to do that half halt so that you're still trotting and then we're halting, but you're not moving, and you're not pushing your horse too hard. And then also just going up from a standstill into a trot is, I think, a category on that as well. And that's, again, a practice, and that's an upper level skill that, you do have to take some time and effort to get there. So practice at home, and you don't have to have an arena Pick a tree, you know, as you go down the road, pick a blade of grass, a rock, and decide when my horse's nose gets to there, that is Y or Z or whatever it needs to be. And I am going to do X. I'm going to go to a working trot at that at that rock until I get to the tree that has the broken limb. And at that point, I'm going to, when his nose hits that tree, I'm going to stop. And so you don't need a ring or even cones or anything fancy. I have a friend that she takes the trash out every week with her driving pony, and she just drags it behind him and practices while she's doing taking the trash out. And she just works on her stops and her halts and backing in a straight line for more than 3 steps without getting the mouth open. That's an important thing. If you have a 4-wheel vehicle, backing in a straight line without getting your vehicle sideways is something.
I do the twass thing as desensitizing my little ones. I have a long driveway, so I just walk it and have the horse on a lead rope.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things. So in driving, not everybody does it, but a lot of people do it. It says you say their name and then you ask for the action. And you can teach that if you are there walking alongside of it. Jackson, halt. So his name is there, so he knows I'm talking to him and not to somebody else. It's him. And then my command, and we can do that while we take the garbage out. And we can do whatever, you know, and that puts the voice commands and the relationship to you and making sure that you both understand what you're being asked to do. Just on the ground and just walking and or ground driving. So did anybody else have any questions? I know I've rambled on quite a bit, sorry.
You're doing fine.
Needless to say, I can talk about this all day and have. Yeah, you laugh. You were at the last symposium. Uh-huh. I do have I have 7 rain boards. You can practice your driving without taking your horse out. There's a blog post at the Carriage Association of America that I wrote. It's on their blog called Driving in the Dining Room, I believe. And it's basically how you can use a kitchen chair to set up a rain board. Rain boards were used for hundreds of years to teach people how to drive. And that's how the US military used to teach everybody how to drive back in the day. So you can certainly look at one of those. And then once you figure out your hands, you can add the whip and adding whip control and being able to touch over here without messing up these lines and getting finesse. You can get finesse without having to be behind an actual horse. All right. Any other questions? Maureen, did you have anything else that you want to know about? Oop, your microphone's not on.
You have always been a big help to me, and I appreciate it. So
you're welcome.
I did notice when you were going over harnesses, I'm not sure if you said it before I got on, but that one picture with the very slim lines of harness, that's what happened to me when I started out. I thought those were okay. You know, I bought one of those cheap nylon harnesses, and happily you taught me early on that they don't really work.
Yeah. Now things that are, as with most things that are cheap are not always the best thing for us. Very sadly. And which also, as a side note, if you're having trouble holding your lines, your reins, they come in different sizes, shapes, and materials. So if it's too wide for yours and you're using like a draft horse rein or something like that, they make them smaller. And particularly women's hands sometimes need that. So we now have the driving rein boards with 7 different types of reins on them.
Wow.
So there are options out there.
And I think actually, I've seen the pictures when you were at the conference or where you showed them. And I think it might be just fun actually to get our populace involved, you know, not just for us to learn how to drive, but having, it's another thing. It's not about just driving. I always try to get our populace also involved and show them what we do with horses and how much is behind the work we do. Or the skills.
Well, and we went to It Takes My Child to Raise a Village this past weekend, which was my first time there. Great event, new location, lovely location. We had, I believe, 5 different horse activities there. No actual horses. Actually, maybe we had 4. But anyways, the Baroness or whoever was in charge there commented that it was the most equestrian, non-equestrian event she'd ever been to. So you can certainly do those type of things. You can bring out your A&S projects and share those if you're not able to take a horse. I now have, so we have 32-inch minis. So I now have Maximilian, which is one of those Tangled, the horse from Tangled, and you can ride, you know, the little kids can ride them. And I take him with me places now, and people think that's a lot of fun. He neighs at them, and I can use him to demo stuff. And I can and have used him as an 8th horse for demoing reinsmanship, because if you get too much collection, he neighs at you. And sometimes his feet make sounds so that it sounds like he's running away, and I'm like, so what do we do now?
Yeah, I started, well, I did it pre-pandemic once, and then in April, the event we did non-equestrian head-to-head challenge, which at the end, I dropped the following activity because people had so much fun doing a head-to-head challenge, the squires with the knights, the couples, the kids with the parents, it was just really, really great to see how much fun they had. And we at the end needed to stop because at 4 o'clock we joust. So I needed to go and stop that to get the rest of the day done. But yes, any suggestions to bring the populace up to the equestrians and meet and greet the horses kind of thing? It's awesome.
I thought I know that the COVID was a bad thing, obviously, but we did a lot of stuff during COVID that was online that people could see, and that was great.
It definitely gave me a lot of time and ideas, and to do other things. So for me, I feel like this year more than last year, getting back to doing things in person and just basically even showing what we did during the pandemic. So on the Iris Festival, I also do my domestication of a wild horse based on Rufus presentation while the horse is there.
So Anastasia Ropa, who presented at the symposium, she also does the wild horse with the medieval stuff. You should check out her presentations on that. I will send you the link
awesome.
So I don't forget. And then the other thing is,
I've seen something, but she collected a real wild horse, right?
Oh yes.
Mine wasn't truly wild, and I make the distinction. It was a feral horse, 6-year-old, never handled, but it wasn't completely feral out like she did. So it was in a pasture of 60 acres, but just not handled all of her life. So it is more, I consider her a feral horse, still not handled, but not as truly wild. So now make this, she knew the fences. It wasn't, she never seen a fence before. So hers is,
Anastasia's
is
seen a fence, it just didn't respect them.
I seen a post that her horse first night went through the fences, and I didn't have those issues. And mine is done, that horse is now under saddle, and we do mounted archery and everything else with her. So that was my project during pandemic. So, but I talk about it in the Iris Festival, first time I do it publicly. Anyway,
Good deal.
so in case you do show up, I talk about it.
Yeah, I'm not gonna make it, I don't think,
I know.
but I really wanted to do the Japanese horseshoe. And actually somebody that is visiting I believe France right now actually posted a shoe today, and I have it on my Facebook page if you haven't seen it. It's pretty cool. Anton, I don't, maybe you were here earlier and I didn't see you, but do you have any questions?
No, I just got in here late. I just got done feeding my horses and I was like, oh crap, Zoom meeting. So I zoomed in here to get to it.
Okay.
Welcome. I think it's the first time you've been in here, right?
Yeah, it's first time.
Awesomeness.
Just
It
trying
is
to
recorded, so you can watch everything that we talked about for the last, I don't know, 1.5 hours.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's fine.
It gets good after the first 15 minutes.
Nah. No, just really, I was just going to talk about generally that things are pretty slow out here in Western Calentier, or Western Arkansas, for those of you that are not in the SCA. I guess it's all SCA peoples. Although we are starting to get a lot of people from the Ren Fair, which are interested. So I may actually have 2 jousters there, Geza. So we'll find out. But we're just trying to do
just
best
such a
we
long
can.
way. I need a horse when I travel that distance, or I'm just always ground crewing, which is fine. It's just every time I go somewhere, I'm not expecting to get a horse. That I did have Tanner to ride last golf was phenomenal. So it's just always a privilege.
Well, my normal riding horse, Pusher, the one I joust on, he's developing a neurological issue, and his back hind end is starting to get really weak on him. So we're working on it. We're not sure. He's tested negative for EPM, but it could be anything. So we're still watching. He hasn't progressively got worse, but he's not getting any better. So regretfully, he's retired now, it seems. But I have Magic, the draft, Pertron, and then also we're going to be working with Rex, getting him on speed. They're both old enough now to where I can start putting weight on them, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
It's life.
Awesome. If nobody else has a question about driving, I'm going to stop the recording.
Oh, we're talking about driving. Okay. Actually, I have been doing driving with Magic. We have a little wagonette. I don't know if you saw it at Golf Wars or not. He pulls really, really well. The only question I have about driving, and it's primarily driving on asphalt. Are you putting boron on the bottom of your shoes for your horses? I've heard
So it depends on what your farrier recommends, because if you're some asphalt, like the asphalt we use in New York, I'm better with tungsten pins. But sometimes I am better off with borium. So that's one of those things you have to ask your farrier about.
Well, he's suggested a couple things, and one of them sounds really strange, and I was going to ask y'all this specific question. He was saying that he's talked to a lot of people that actually tap the shoes and put in grade 8 bolts inside. I don't know if that's true or not. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, they do it, particularly on draft horses.
Yeah, because I mean, Magic wears a size 8. I mean, so it's huge shoe. There's plenty of material. I'm not worried about it, breaking.
They definitely don't do it on light horses. But I've seen some pretty wicked shoes. The biggest thing you have to worry about, I mean, obviously, is if your horse tracks up, you need to make sure they're not going to grab.
Right.
And so it depends too, when they tap that, if they're going to make it so that you can take that out.
Yep.
And then you put the plug in. So it depends on what their thoughts are there.
Yeah, because I don't.
My dad was a farrier for 40 some years, so.
Cool. Yeah, I don't want him to have cleats on all the time, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, but the borium, it's just a real pain because my farrier doesn't have the ability to welded on, so to speak, or brazen on. So
are you using essentially like a keg shoe?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So, but he drives great. I have no problem. We have a little wagonette, so it's a lot of fun. That was my only question.
Okay.
You should
Yeah,
send pictures to Kathleen.
Yeah. If it's one of those things where it just depends a lot on what you're doing with your horse and what you're trekking up on. I would not personally leave my horses in the pasture with that. But I also recognize the economic value of not changing your shoes all the time. That was the benefit of having a farrier for a father. If it was raining out that day and I was going to a show, he would change my shoes. I don't get that anymore. But yeah, it's tough because sometimes you need traction and to keep them safe, but at the same time, too much traction, will break them down. So.
Yeah, we've messed around with the boreum a little bit, and because I brazed some on some old shoes and we put them on, and he does really good with the boreum, but it wears off so fast. He's just huge.
So you might need usually often you can buy them with the boreum on them from like the Amish or someplace like that. So it's a little harder for me because we don't have draft horses, but I know with the light horses, we can definitely buy them with boreum already on them. And you shouldn't be going through them very quickly. Are you going through them faster than a shoe job?
Yes. But out here, we're really hilly. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're on asphalt up here, he's using it a lot.
Is he a daisy cutter?
No, he's a Percheron. He's
so does he pick up his feet a lot, or does he?
No, he's not really a prancer, so to speak. But it's just he comes down so hard on them all the time.
Yeah.
So it's like when he stomps flies, he loosens his shoes. I mean, he's just really strong.
Yeah. So you can get harder boreum, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
I believe there's more than one type, last I remember, and some of it is softer than another. So you might double check on that.
No.
Because it might be that where you are, you have the soft type. Typically, so my mom used to have a farrier supply store. In New York, we could put some really heavy stuff on them because it's winter and it's ice.
Right.
Whereas you don't probably have the ice issue. So it could make sense that you might have a little softer boreum. Just
maybe, I don't know.
You might check on that.
Yep.
If you like the boreum, but you're going through it fast. But cool.
We'll try. I'll probably on the next set. I'm getting ready to start make shoes also. So on the next set, I'll probably do a tap in for the grade 8 bolts and do them just nubs and make them so I can take them in and out and put plugs in. And I'll let you guys know how that works.
Cool.
Awesome.
It's always fun when it's mud season trying to get the plugs out.
Your fun and my fun, it's totally different. Mud season is not fun. So.
I'm barely hear you guys. I'm sorry.
That's okay. We're just talking about how mud season is.
Yeah.
So all right. Do we have any other
fun? So I'm going to stop the recording if that's okay.